a problem can sometimes reveal itself to be an opportunity in disguise.
Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. Today I'll be talking with Thomas Wedell-Wedellsborg, speaker, advisor, co-author of Innovation as Usual, and author of a brilliant new book on solving your problems, What's Your Problem? And that's just what I want to talk with him about today, about changing the problems you solve to solve your toughest problems. That, plus we'll talk about judging barbecue competitions, hipsters and shuffleboard, boys and hammers, beating Electabuzz, what on earth's the 10 o'clock rule, and why in the world furniture upholstery might just save humanity. Gotcha. So welcome to the show, Thomas. Are you ready to shine?
How could I not be ready after that amazing intro, Michael? Thanks so much for it.
Did I mention we're going to have some fun here today, Thomas?
I suspect.
Excellent. So before we dive right into things, and it's interesting because I was watching a Time movie, it was with Meg Ryan a week ago, where somebody actually fell into an elevator shaft. So it's very interesting that I'm going to ask this as the first question. What's the elevator problem?
It is the best way to explain what my book and what the concept of reframing is about. Imagine that you own a building, and that your tenants, they're really complaining a lot about the elevator in the building. They're like, it's too slow, they're waiting, it's annoying. And the way most people try to solve that is, well, they frame the problem as the elevator is slow. And then they figure out, how do we make it faster? That might work. What reframing is about is basically the ability, whenever you face a problem, instead of jumping into solution mode, then you take a step back and you say, is there a different way of thinking about the problem? And the beautiful illustration of that is, of course, what a lot of landlords do if they get complaints about the speed of an elevator. They put up a mirror in the hallway. So people, they look at their own reflection, they fall in love, they forget that they're waiting. And that's just an example of the idea that sometimes you're better off not solving the problem you have in front of you, but saying, is there a different problem to solve? In this case, making people forget that they're waiting.
Excellent. In fact, that makes me think of gas stations, among other places, which is we could put a tiny little LED TV on each level to completely distract them and take them out of their sense of time, a lot less expensive than a new elevator.
Exactly. And such a beautiful, you see this in Disney World as well, where you're waiting in line for the next ride, and Disney World is just really, really good at kind of making you pay attention to other things or entertaining you along the way, instead of just saying, tough luck, you're gonna wait.
Now this sounds like Vegas, where they'll actually turn up the lights at night and actually in some places put in a blue sky with clouds to completely convince you, have you forget that it's nighttime.
I think in Vegas, if they could intravenously feed you coffee, they would.
All right. So that gets us to the crux of the matter. Are we solving the wrong problems then?
We very often are. And this goes everywhere. I mean, I work with businesses, I work with individuals, and it's just so often we're just swinging into action and like hammering away at a problem. Very often it's not working. And we still fail to step back and say, wait a second, is there something going on here? There's a famous psychotherapist, Steve DeShazer, who estimated that for all the people that came into his practice, 2 out of 3 weren't capable of actually saying, hey, here's my problem in a clear way. So most of us are just bad at this thing. We're so driven to jump into action and trying to fix things. We're not very good at saying, wait, what's the problem we're trying to solve? Is there another way of thinking about that problem?
And sorry to cut you off there. That's an excellent point that really takes, we'll use the analogy of the hammer, because we're going to come to the boy and the hammer in a bit, hammering home, which is, and it may come from our amygdala, it may come from our fight or flight mechanism, may come from looking for the tiger, that before we even know what we're jumping into, we want to jump and take action and fix it.
Yeah. And to be clear, that's not a bad impulse. I mean, we are not born to sit and contemplate things on a mountain for all of our lives. The challenge that I see is not that we jump into action when we run into a problem. It's that we keep trying to do it, even though, you have a problem in your relationship or whatever, and you've tried to solve it 50 times the same way, and you're still not taking a step back and saying, wait a minute, may I need to rethink what's going on here instead of trying the 51st time with some kind of, just doing the same thing over and over.
Let's go from there, and let's go to a very interesting problem. I really, really like this one, particularly as I was trying to get my dad recently to volunteer at a shelter because he doesn't want another dog right now. And I'm like, well, let's just get you around dog energy. Tell us about the shelter problem and Bark Buddy.
If you look at this is in the US, people love dogs, and that's a great thing. But that also means that there's just a lot of dogs that end up in shelters. Mm-hmm. And for decades, we've had this problem that there are more dogs in shelters than there are people ready to adopt them.
Yeah.
Now, the first example of somebody I saw who took a different approach to this is a company called BarkBox. And this is a startup based in New York. Mm-hmm. They kind of send a box of stuff to your dog every month. And they started thinking differently about the problem and realized that this is not just about motivating people to, get a dog from a shelter instead of from a pet store. Mm-hmm. They realized that there is a missing link in that chain of getting people to adopt, namely easy access to the dog. When you think about shelters, they're not on Main Street because they don't have a lot of money. They're a little bit outside of town. They can be difficult to find. And so BarkBox created an app called Bark Buddy, which is basically Tinder for dogs. You literally went onto it, and there you saw all of the dogs that were adoptable in your area, and you could see the details of the shelter that had it. And that just... It was just such a creative solution to it. It cost $8,000 to implement, which is very little in the space. And they ended up on Jimmy Fallon, on Fox News, on lots of attention. Just a beautiful example of somebody going in, not trying to solve the same problem, but trying to see, is there a different way of thinking about that problem that we might be capable of doing something about?
Thank you. And there's another dog example. I love all these dog examples. I won't even get started on I Am Dog. But with that said, we have Lori Weiss, the executive director of Downtown Dog Rescue in LA, who's going, all of these dogs keep showing up at the shelter. What do we do?
And that was a story that really stuck with me because the Bark Buddy app, that was a great idea, but that's like a little bit, we have a new technology that can solve things for us. Lori took a completely different approach. She didn't start with the problem, how do we get more people to adopt? She actually aimed at a very different problem, which was, how do we keep more dogs with their first family? How do we make sure that fewer dogs enter the shelter space in the first place? And the way she did it, very simple. In South LA, she took one of her people. Mm-hmm. She got her, the staff member, to be at the shelter, and whenever a family came in with a dog or another pet for that matter, they just asked, "Why are you handing over your pet today? Yeah. And would you prefer not to?" And that was a crucial question because most of the industry had assumed that, wait, if you're somebody who voluntarily hands over your dog to a shelter, you must be a bad person. You should never have had a dog in the first place. Very easy way of thinking about other people that we so often fall into. What she discovered amazingly was that 75% of the people who showed up, they were in tears. They really, really wanted to keep their dog, but they had no other options. And she realized this wasn't a people problem. This is a financial problem. Mm-hmm. Most of these families, they'd had the dog for years. They'd taken good care of it. But then they're forced to move into a new building. The landlord suddenly makes a demand. You're going to have to pay $150 to deposit to have this dog here. And the family did not have a way to get that $150. That they couldn't do it. And so their last option in their mind was to take the dog to a shelter. Once she realized this was not a problem with bad people, she just started helping them. She just started, you know what? Instead of putting this dog on the shelter, that's going to be at least $20 per night with overhead and so on for the system. We can just put you in touch with a vet. We'll get this taken care of, or maybe we can extend a loan to your landlord. And she managed to dramatically reduce the cost of helping dogs and getting a lot of them out of the shelter. Such a powerful example, I think.
Woohoo! And it's asking a different question, and it's looking at things a different way. One of the things that I do when I coach clients, and a lot of the clients that I coach are stuck at whatever level of the strata, they're stuck. They can't find a way out. And one of the challenges I give them is 5 to 10 things a day, depending on who they are. I'll give them 5 or 10, how much they can handle, of looking at things a different way, of coming up with the craziest options possible. Let's do fantasy land. What's the advantage of increasing the options?
Yeah. So there's some super interesting research on decision making, and there's a professor called Paul Knott at Ohio State University who studied lots and lots of people making decisions, and he basically found the single best thing you can do is to create multiple different options for yourself. So whenever you're facing a choice that's should I study this thing or not, that's a sign that you need to invent more options. Should we put money into this project or not? Much better to go in and say, we have this little bit of money we may be capable of putting into a project. Should it be project A, B, C, D, or is it better to hold on to it for now? Instead of studying a specific program, what other things could I consider? The second you do that, the second you create more than one option to consider, you improve your decision rate. It basically half of the time we get it wrong, and then it falls to a third of the time we get it wrong. So massive improvement just by coming up with new alternative choices before you make, the either or choice you're facing.
I like that. Years ago, well, many decades ago now, I put my home in Colorado on the market. I drove out to California. I'd been a pro cyclist. I'd gotten injured. Years later, I'm like, I'll become a pro triathlete. And I couldn't even find a place to live. And I came back, tail between my legs, to Colorado. And I didn't realize I was doing these techniques at the time, but I said, what else is possible? And the next thing you know, I found myself getting an MBA, getting a second master's, back in school in a completely different direction outside of what I thought, because I didn't just ask, all right, how do I make this one thing work? The square peg in a round hole and force it.
Yeah. What I love about that advice, it's so simple yet so powerful. Like literally just whenever you're facing one of those should I do it or not choices, go in and invent a third option.
I love it. So let's talk about, you have 3 keys to reframing. Reframe the problem, analyze, solve. What's that mean?
It's really the distinction between analysis and framing that's important here, because solving it we're used to, like trying to do different types of things. Most people, when they try to think about a problem, they try to analyze it, and analyzing it, well, that means in the elevator story I just shared, that means asking, why is the elevator slow? It's almost like an engineering mindset, trying to understand all the details, the measurements, all of that stuff. Framing is a different question. Framing is about asking, is the speed of the elevator the right thing to focus on? Or is there something else going on here? Might we have a bad relationship to the tenants? Could we do the mirror thing? Why is it important for them to be fast? That's the core thing here. So you always want to mix those 3 things. You want to figure out what to focus on. That's the framing. You want to think about more carefully about the details of that, and then you want to try doing stuff to move forward and see if we can change things.
Very cool. I'm home alone. Usually my wife, producer, is running everything behind the scenes. She's out having fun at Sedona after our last boot camp. At the door right now to the studio is Sir Meowser's large kitty, scratching on the door, as he often does when the mama is away. Now, we could say he's wanting more food, and I have tried every food under the sun this morning. Or we could ask a different question and say, is there something else going on? Is he bored? Does he need more activities? What have I not thought about to please Sir Meowsers?
Yeah, it's amazing to me how you can apply this even to the simplest of problems, right? Because what's going on in Sir Meowser? Did I get that right?
Sir, he's been knighted, so Sir Meowsers, yes.
What? Before we continue, what's the story behind the knighthood?
So when he originally came, he came and sat in my lap I was living on Maui, and he came and sat on my lap during a meditation. He had strolled into our yard. Eventually, I pet him. He bit me, and he wandered off. But gradually, he came to start to take ownership of us. And then when we were leaving Maui, we literally told him one morning, "We're leaving Maui. You're a feral cat. The decision is up to you. If you want to be here at 8 a.m. on Friday or Saturday, we will bring you with us." And he chose to. And that started a relationship with him as the rock of our family. He is the grounded Buddha individual that holds everything together. But he does have his quirk. He has gone from free birding to an indoor cat because we do have mountain lions around the house. We have caught one on video during a sales video. Behind me, a mountain lion leapt out. So he's indoors now. And so he holds us grounded. And at the same time, we are continuously challenged to figure out how and what to feed him. And it is a question that we are continuously stepping back. Is this really about food? Is it about boredom? Is it about something else? And continue, I call it snow globing a problem. I was discussing this with you earlier. Yep. And it's something that I have my clients do in meditation, is I have them focus on the breath. They get into a really quiet state. And then I have them imagine either their lives or a problem as a snow globe. And I want to hover them around it. I want them to look inside of it. I want them to dive into the snow globe. I want them to even go into the size of the snowflakes and start to look, what would the world look like if you were a snowflake? And by looking from all these different perspectives, new answers and possibilities come to them.
That to me is such a powerful metaphor as well for what reframing is about. One of the core things I teach people is to try to look outside the frame. Because what happens in our minds is when we have a problem, we kind of almost, draw a frame around it and say, oh, this is the problem. And very often people just delve straight in there and examine all the details when what they should be doing is to do your snow globe thing and actually try to take a step back as well. See, is there something we're not paying attention to right now that's actually important? One of the examples I share is that of you imagine that your teenage daughter comes back from school early. She's really upset, and it turns out she got into a fight with her math teacher. And what most people do in that situation is to delve into the details of the fight. They say, "Oh, why did you get upset? What did he say? How did you respond?" Very often, when you're looking at a problem like that, instead of delving into the details, you may want to look at the bigger context, because what typically causes problems like that is actually something like your daughter didn't get her breakfast this morning, or maybe she didn't get enough sleep recently. And that was what made the difference between a discussion and a fight with her math teacher. Instead of just saying, my daughter is becoming more rebellious, or the math teachers, oh, they're really bad, they should have better teachers in school.
I was going to ask, and there's a question that I challenge my coaching clients, which is, what am I missing? But in this case, this goes to when I used to coach runners, and still for myself, I'm an avid trail runner. If I trip on the trails, I will stop myself and I will ask, what were you thinking about? Which in essence is to say, what else is going on?
A very powerful and pretty simple idea of not getting sucked into what's in front of you, but asking questions like that.
Excellent. So let's go into. I'm going to go through all of your book, but we've got we're going to go into the nitty gritty. We've got a opportunity going on that we're trying to figure out. This massive property outside of Aspen, which on paper appears to be a stretch. The owner wants to sell. We want to buy. We're trying to figure out how to make it happen. On paper, with the banks, it looks difficult. And I am continuously asking myself, and particularly after reading your brilliant book, either what am I missing? How can I reframe this? Or what's another way of looking at this? Both A and B want to make this happen. It will happen. I am extremely positive, but it will take something creative.
Yeah. So, I mean, we can try running this through the approach I have around framing. And the very first one is just whenever you have a problem, take a second to try to state the problem. Because so often what happens is, and I know you've spoken about this earlier with writing exercises and so on, very often we can walk around with the problem in our heads, but it's actually pretty fuzzy. until we try to write it down. There's something magical about forcing yourself to putting it into words.
And written words.
Ideally written words. Not always possible. You might be on the phone with somebody, but doing that, it's amazing to see sometimes that when I ask people to do it, they may have had a problem for years, and yet they actually struggle a little bit to do it. It's kind of like, wait, I now have to explain what the problem is. There's a magic in doing that just helps you start thinking differently about your problem instead of getting stuck in all that usual noise that's going on inside your head about it.
So if we were to put it at its most basic level, my question, and I can see it from both sides, mine is, how do I buy this property? The owner's is, how do I help this person to buy my property? But that's probably not getting at the crux of it, and I realize it, and I'm trying to step back. So I hope I don't become a slippery weasel for you here. But the next question becomes, and this is going to mean a phone call with the owner. What is the need to sell it specifically now? Yeah,
that's exactly right. Because notice what happens here. We very often come up with an answer, and then we just stop questioning that. Like, yes, he wants to sell the house or the property. But why? Like, going in and trying to understand what's going on. Is it because he desperately needs money? Is it because he's moving somewhere and they're facing a deadline? Does he actually have more flexibility in some areas because, maybe the money isn't really the important thing to him? Maybe there's something about heritage around. He wants to pass it on to the right people. Or like, there are often so many things lying beneath our immediate kind of say, oh, here's my problem, that you need to dig into to hopefully find a new angle on it.
And it's making me think that I really want to snow globe this and step back, which I do on a daily basis. However, I teach a process called automatic writing, where you let the pen go in meditation and you get outside of your small self. Sometimes we can get stuck in our own me situation, can't we?
Absolutely. And I think that's what I love what you just did was you didn't just explain your problem, you also started to take the perspective of the owner and saying what problem is he trying to solve for himself. And that's the exact right move that you want to do whenever you're dealing with a problem involving multiple people. Try to not just get stuck in your own little ego gravity well, if you will. And try to genuinely understand what's going on the other side.
That's interesting because it both uncouples us from the problem, and I'm convinced there's some magic to saying, how can I help you?
Yeah. It even, in my experience, even asking that question, it can create a lot of trust in a situation. You know this, you go into maybe a negotiation with somebody, and they just seem like they're all out, they're in it for themselves. If suddenly somebody else starts to show a genuine interest in solving your problem, that leads to a totally different conversation. And that's often where you find creative solutions to things.
Awesome. So we were just talking about a problem statement here. What's the best way that we can create this, or a few steps to creating our problem statement?
I'd say two general things. One is to keep it pretty brief. You're not looking here to write a dissertation on the problem. You're trying. It's almost as if you're taking a wet lump of clay, you're smacking it onto the table, and you're quickly shaping it just to have something to start working with. So it's actually not important in the beginning that you have the exact right problem, whatever. It's just get something on the table that we can start working with. The second part, that's the we. This is difficult to do alone. I mean, you can do it. Sometimes that's the right way to start. But this method of reframing becomes much more powerful the second you have one or two other people helping you try to do it. There's something about other people, they just bring a different perspective. They allow you to see beyond your own blind spots in a way that'll take you hours to do on your own instead.
I love this. I think I want to parse both of them. First off, I love to play with energy and light. And that could be woo-woo, that could be not woo-woo. But in this case, when you said quickly shape it, what we're doing is we're getting stuck energy. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And you're starting to get the energy moving. And once that energy is moving, it's the same as if you're stuck, go for a walk. Take yourself out of your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. There is an important thing here with momentum, because one of the things that led me to write the book was really the realization that other people have talked about understanding problems, but they were stuck in this idea that you have to do all of that work up front. Like, you have to sit down for ages and really, really study every single myopic detail of the problem, and then you might start doing something. That's a bad way of doing it. That will get you to paralysis by analysis, or like just ruminating forever. The key here is quickly put something out there, a problem statement, even describing it to a couple of friends, and start working with it. Like that creates a very, very different feeling.
Excellent. I'm going to use a really strange analogy or metaphor here. I used to be a professional cyclist, was also a skater, and to become a better skater, I took ballet, in which case the 5 to 7-year-old girls were kicking my butt. But it took me so far out of the box, it helped me learn much better body control. When we're asking, we're going to bring this back to reframing here, when we're asking for a problem statement and we recruit assistants, it's good to get people who aren't the same as us, way outside of the box, isn't it?
And that really strikes home when you realize that we are often too close to our own problems to see them clearly. And that also means that people who are very similar to you, they kind of tend to see things the same way. So my general rule is that the more important your problem is, the more important it is to get somebody in who just has a different perspective, who is different from you. Not always possible. If you only have 5 minutes, then you have to make do with whoever you can get hold of. But otherwise, try to get somebody in, a couple of people ideally, who can just infuse their ballet perspective on your cycling, or whatever it is. Like it can make a tremendous difference.
I love it. So let's go to how do we review the problem? And you have things like, is the statement true? What are some of the questions that we want to ask here?
The second you have a problem statement in front of you, you're gonna start to develop a sense for. I almost talk about problem literacy. Once you start getting used to working with problems, you tend to see patterns in them. And one of the basic ones you just mentioned is just asking, is this true? Like, the problem is that my mother-in-law is an idiot. Is she? Or is there something else?
Yeah.
Good. Also, really important one, making sure you haven't baked a solution into your problem statement. It just very often we tend to fall in love with a solution, and then we kind of we say, oh, the problem is I can't have that solution. Now, in your example, I'm not sure that this always applies, but you'd go in and say, why are you building the property? Why do you want it? Like, what are you trying to achieve? And is that necessarily 100% linked with getting that particular property? Is there potentially a different way of kind of doing it? Another example, just making sure you haven't framed the problem too narrowly. So this is a beautiful example from my brother who was, he worked in a broadcaster. Some of his people came to him and said, hey, we have this exciting new project we want to invest in. Can we find money for it in the budget? And the answer was basically no, because the company was kind of going through a little bit tough times. But my brother realized that was not the right question to ask. Like saying, can we find money for it in our budget? That actually, it presupposes that the money has to come from our budget. And he just said, listen, well, we just need some money. It can come from anywhere. Can you talk to people in our industry? And sure enough, they came back a couple of days later and said, we found somebody who wants to invest in this because that's something that makes sense to them too. So such a simple thing, just going in and saying, am I putting needless limits on the way I define the problem, self-imposed limitations, if you will.
Excellent. There's another one here, which is strong emotions. And I know I would have people, I call it becoming an open-hearted warrior, to actually lean into the emotions because the body is very visceral. You'll feel, a tightened gut, wherever it is, to lean into that and go through it to see where are these emotions coming from and how can that itself make me stuck.
Yeah. And that's something I've learned. Basically, when people express their problems, try to listen for the emotions and notice emotional words. And there's another interesting place where this manifests, because when I run my workshops, I ask people to pick a personal problem they're facing and try to solve that.
Yeah.
And now it's very characteristic. There are some people who choose very safe problems. Mm-hmm. They pick something about, I can't figure out a way to park my car. It's like, yeah, that's a problem. But is that really is that your biggest challenge at the moment? What I've noticed was that the people who dare a little bit more, they often they try to tackle a problem that they're actually troubled by. Like, I have a problem in my family, or I'm when we have meetings at work, I'm kind of afraid to assert myself, or like things where they a little bit struggle with looking in the mirror and kind of dealing with it, versus taking these little bit more like, I have too many emails, or whatever those small frictions are. So the emotional aspect here is very important.
Very good. And then going back to, does it have to be in the budget? Use an example. I love this. I was going along the same lines, although you had several problems in there that did stump me. I did come up with 7 ships. But when we got to hipsters, shuffleboard, and food truck, I found this one fascinating because I'm going, outsource, man. There's another way. Tell us about this problem and how they solved it.
So this is an amazing woman I know. Her name is Ashley Albert. And her business partner, Jonathan Snap, they at one point, they were going to Florida for a crazy reason. So Ashley's a very multifaceted character. She went down there to get certified as a judge in barbecue competitions, because that's the kind of thing she does. Now, when Ashley and Jonathan were down there, they saw some hipsters hanging out in a park playing shuffleboard. And that seemed to be very popular with them. And Ashley went like, that's interesting. We have a lot of hipsters back in Brooklyn. I wonder if there's an opportunity to start a club around this. And sure enough, her and Jonathan, they created the Royal Palms Shuffleboard Club, which is in Brooklyn. And it's literally like this old warehouse you get into, and there's shuffleboard course. And it's just full of Brooklynites kind of playing. Yeah. Now, that was the background for the problem they ran into, which is, should they serve food at the venue? And if you have a friend who works with hospitality, I mean, food is just a hassle. Like, there are so many regulations, there are permits, you need special equipment, staffing. It's not a good way to make money, whereas alcohol and selling drinks and so on, that's where the money tends to be. Problem that they kind of needed food for the club to work. It was both more difficult to get the alcohol permit without it. They needed the hipsters and the Brooklynites to kind of hang around and be there for an evening instead of just popping in for a game. And so most people in that situation, they would have kind of analyzed, well, we have 2 options, like serve food or don't serve food and accept that we'll have fewer customers. What Ashley and Jonathan did was they went in and said, is there a way to get the benefits of serving food without the hassle of having to do it? And they came up with what I still think is such a brilliant solution. They built a garage right next to the club with an open window into the club. And then they used New York's food trucks. So literally every night you see a food truck driving in there and parking and feeding the folks in the club. That meant Ashley didn't have to suffer any of the pain of kind of having like a food license and all that stuff, because that was with the food truck. And she could still get all of her clients to stick around, and as a side bonus, they could serve new food every week. Like, this week we are going to have the tacos or whatever it is. Such a beautiful illustration of again, pushing back against trade-offs. Most people say, should we do A or B? Ashley and other creative people go in and say, is there a better way?
Thank you. Years ago, well, basically to describe it, I have a left leg that has titanium femur, titanium hip, no ACL, no other CLs, MCL, no lateral or medial meniscus. The knee's not supposed to work. And yet it works great. And I run mountains and I run like the wind. And if I was to go to a doctor now, if I was to go to a surgeon, he would tell me, or she, you need surgery for this, that, or the other thing, which is why when people come to me around health coaching, I'm always like, maybe there's another perspective, because if somebody is a carpenter, they're going to suggest carpentry. So what's the danger of boys and hammers?
This is a saying from a gentleman called Abraham Kaplan, and he was a scientist, and he back in '64 he wrote a book about being a scientist, where he formulated this beautiful sentence, which is basically, if you give a boy a hammer, everything looks like a nail. That's very true for everybody. We have these preferred solutions. We have these tools that we're used to wielding. And there is a point at which we just automatically go in and say, a problem? That must be this kind of problem. Let me swing my hammer on it. It's, again, not wrong to have a favorite hammer. We have preferred tools because they often work. What is dangerous is when you become blind to seeing when it's not working. Like we discussed it before, when you start yelling at your spouse again, and it's kind of clearly didn't work the last 50 times. Should we try it another 100 times, or should we try a different hammer or a different tool?
If you're having, I'm thinking hammer and spouse. Well, say you're hammering your spouse with your voice. Is the goal to win the argument, or is the goal for happiness and bliss in the relationship? You may have the wrong goal here.
Yeah, that's another lens I suggest to people in trying to think about their problems. With a problem, we tend to think, we want to go here. This is success. And then we focus all of our energy on the thing that's stopping us. That's the problem, the obstacle. Yeah. Very often, there's actually a creative solution in rethinking what winning or what success looks like. You kind of bring it up, a really powerful example of that I heard. This is a piece of advice I received that I thought was potent. When you have a friend who's complaining about their partners or their family or whatever, and it's very easy to lean into the complaint and saying, your sister sounds like a real pain. I understand why you're upset. The advice was basically to remember that what people most of all want with the other people in their lives, they want harmonious relationships. They may have a really tense relationship to their sister or their father or whatever, and you can make that a little worse by leaning into it and say you're right. Or you can look for a way to say to make that better. What people want deep down is to have happier and better relationships to the people around them. And that's just a very different goal from getting revenge or getting back at them and all of those things that so easily come to the surface.
Thank you. I like to say the complaint is not about the complaint, but in this case, it may be that until you peel away the layers, the goal is not about the goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, people forget to, sometimes they don't know what their goal is. That's also very common. But even when they do, they don't question those goals. They may think, what is happiness? Is it having $1 million in the bank? If you ask people who do have $1 million in the bank, they're a little happier, but not massively. What is your goal? And can you think differently about what that is?
Thank you. Take a real-world example here from back in the Carter administration. The Camp David Accords, because somebody or somebodies did a brilliant job at stepping back with this.
Such a powerful story. And I think one of the things that attracted me to reframing as a topic was that it's useful both when you deep dive into the snow globes, like the tiny little details and all the small problems we have, and it's useful for big political problems. The story here is basically that Egypt and Israel were fighting over the Sinai Peninsula. Now, Israel was possessing at the moment. Egypt, they of course wanted their land back. It was theirs originally, and every attempt at drawing a border had just failed because nobody would yield. They both wanted the land. What the breakthrough that occurred was actually to go in and say, wait, what does this land bring you? What is your goal with this? Is it just to own the land, or is there something behind it? And what they realized was Egypt and Israel's goals were different. Egypt wanted their land. They wanted the territory because it was originally theirs. Israel wanted something different. They wanted security. They were afraid that if Egypt owned all of the peninsula, they could have like hostile forces right across the territory. They would have no time to react if there's another conflict or whatever. So Israel, they didn't consider ownership. They thought about having the Egyptian forces not right across their own border. And that's what led to the creative solution of the demilitarized zone, where Egypt owned the land but couldn't have their armed forces stationed there. Very, very potent example of how understanding people's real goals can sometimes solve even tremendously tense conflicts.
Awesome, awesome. And if Egypt and Israel were people, or if Israel was a person, and Israel was struggling, I would say, is there a time, Israel, in the past when you have experienced peace, and what did that look like? And that gets us to examining what you call bright spots.
A bright spot is the idea that at some point, this problem has already been solved, at least partially. And the most fascinating example of that is actually when you have solved it before. Like there's sometimes, other people have solved the problem and we can learn from them, which is great. But the most fascinating thing is really that we have often solved the problem before without being aware of it. And this is the insight of, I mentioned Steve DeShazer earlier, a therapist who worked back in the 80s with a group with his wife, Inso Kim Berg, and basically in Milwaukee. They realized that very often the clients they had in their therapy sessions, they had actually solved their problems before and they didn't need a deep examination of their past and their relationship to their mother or whatever. They just needed to be prompted to look for that positive exception and try to replicate it and try to see, wait, how come I solved it that day? What was different about it?
Thank you, thank you. I want to get to something called the 10 o'clock rule here, because I know with my wife and myself, if I'm driving down the road, I'm focused on the road, even though I guess I could put it into autopilot, but that might even be more dangerous. I'm focused on the road, and that's not necessarily the time to have a deep conversation because my amygdala might be on overdrive. As well as the case for that child without food and for this couple after 10 o'clock.
The story comes from a good friend of mine, Tanya Luna, and her husband. Tanya's an author as well. And when they got married, they had a really good marriage. Mm-hmm. And they had one big problem, which was that sometimes small conflicts that are in every relationship, they got into these really bitter fights about them. Yeah. And Tanya and Brian, initially, when they started discussing it in a calmer moment, they were like, well, we came from two different countries. We have different cultural things. We have slightly different values, different childhoods. All of those discussions, that's where we go. Yeah. And they didn't help. Like you can talk for a year about your childhood and still not necessarily make progress. What made the difference here with Tanya and Brian was one morning they had a discussion about a normally tense topic, namely the budget. Mm-hmm. And there was just no fight. They just kind of talked about it as reasonable adults. And then to Tanya and Brian's credit, they stepped back and said, wait, why did that work? And they realized that you could see it as a problem about different ways of being and values and all of that, but you could also see it as a problem of timing. That literally most of their fights used to happen after 10 at night, where everybody was hungry and tired and cranky and the amygdala, what have we. And so they created this beautiful rule in the relationship, which is the 10 o'clock rule. And that is basically, if your spouse brings up anything even slightly contentious, and it's after 10 o'clock, then you say, honey, 10 o'clock. And then you discuss it in the morning instead. And that just credits with solving 80% of their conflicts in the relationship.
I want to talk about some rules of thumb about seeking exceptions. What's the importance of seeking exceptions?
I'd say looking for what I call unexceptional exceptions, because it's, if you're really stressed and because of your job, it's very easy to come up with a time where you weren't stressed, namely that time you took a 3-month vacation. That's not a terribly helpful bright spot, because that's, you can't just take another 3 months vacation very easily. What is much more helpful is to ask the question, was there a normal day where I worked, but where I got a little bit less stressed than usual? And that is a helpful bright spot, much more so than the extreme examples you may have.
And I like that so much because I'll use the word extreme because it means that you don't need an extreme solution. You may be thinking, I need to quit. I need to move towns. I need to, go to another continent. Yeah. But there was a moment when things were working.
Absolutely. And just finding those. Another good rule of asking is to not just focus on the negative things, but actually, was there a really, really positive bright spot? Like, was there a day where you went to work as usual and you came back from work more energized? There was something that happened at work that really gave you a boost. Looking at that instead of just looking at, what stressed me.
Woohoo! And I'm going to give you a third more. These are all coming from you, though, of course. But when did the problem occur but not matter?
People forget that again, we focus on the problem and we don't look further down the road. In this example, we've been discussing going in and saying, well, was there a day where I got stressed as usual, but that didn't affect me as much, or I didn't bring that stress back home? What was different? Did I go to the gym that day before coming home, or whatever it is? There's very often things that'll help us mitigate the bad consequences of a problem if we just go look for them.
Thank you. Can we teach reframing to kids?
I tried. I normally do this with adults, but at one point I was invited by a good friend of mine who has an elementary prep school in the Hudson River Valley called the Hudson Lab School. Mm-hmm. And so I tried to teach reframing to 5, 6, and 7-year-old kids.
Awesome.
Amazing. And what struck me the most about that session was that, well, what I do in the session, I ask the people in the workshop to come up with a problem that they want to work on. And when I ask adults, well, what problems do you think the kids picked? Yeah. Very systematically, adults will say, well, bedtime, the kids don't like having to go to bed. The iPad, they're not allowed to play enough with it, or maybe that they have to eat food that they don't like. They can't have candy all the time. In reality, none of those things came up. None of them. Not a single problem that the kids surfaced had anything to do with parents, which is great news. They basically accept we are evil dictators. They're okay with it. But what did come up were problems with their siblings, brothers and sisters, or with their friends. And that resonated so powerfully with me because we tend to think when we look at somebody else, they have a problem. Or we're trying to guess what their problem is. We import our own preferences into that. We say, my biggest problem with my kid is to put them to bed, so that must be their biggest problem too. And that's very often not the case. Well, there's just some beautiful examples of, there's one kind of going like, my problem is that I can't, my sister hits me and my family when she gets angry, and you can't hit back because she's smaller than you. It's just a very cute example of, in this case, a young mind struggling with ethics. The one that really got me was a 7-year-old kid, Isabella, who had a 5-year-old sister, Sophia. Problem was that Sophia would always ask Isabella this annoying question, do you want to come upstairs and watch television with me? Now, Isabella initially thought that that's because, Sophia asks annoying question because she is an annoying person. Like that's she's put on this earth to annoy me. That's a mistake we often make. It's called the fundamental attribution error. When people do bad things, we assume this because they're bad people. Now, when she went in and tried to reframe what was going on, she did two very interesting things. First, she said, instead of looking at my sister, can I look at myself? And it's the problem that I don't know how to react in a better way. Can I react in a different way when she starts annoying me? The more powerful one, though, for me, was that she started really trying to see her sister in a kinder, more human light and ask the question, how can I help my sister be less lonely? She realized that her sister had a loneliness problem. And I thought there was something amazing about that, seeing a 7-year-old kid having that degree of empathy and perspective taking for others.
Woohoo! It's huge. And what she did is a couple things. She, as you call it, explored her own contribution and left the word blame behind.
Yeah. Very powerful idea, and this is something I have from one of my favorite pair of authors as well, Dr. Stone and Sheila Heen. They've written the book Difficult Conversations. Thanks for the feedback, both the New York Times bestsellers. That's one of their key things, that you have to be so careful about the word blame, because that kind of assumes that it's somebody's fault and they did it maybe even with intent and so on. Much better concept to talk about is the idea of contribution. And what Sheila and Doug is talking about is to go in and say, how did I, and how did they, who are the other people who are involved, how do we contribute to this thing happening so we can maybe find a better way of doing it? And the key thing here is to understand that contributions can come from multiple people. It's not just about you're to blame. It is, well, you carry part of the reason. That was part of the reason why this happened. But I also I had a part in it too. And maybe we can work together to avoid a similar outcome in the future.
In your book, you talk about overcoming resistance, kind of maybe more in a team environment. And so I'm going to ask a little bit outside of the box here. How do we overcome resistance in our minds? Because we really have to challenge ourselves and do the work that's in your book if we're going to see a different outcome.
The central two lessons I've learned is, first of all, to just start practicing this on really small problems. Because if you think you have to wait, a year to think about that really big problem in your life, or so you have to go away for a weekend to think about it, not going to happen. Like, start applying this to your cat outside the door, to in your relationship, whatever it is. That's one thing. Just building the mental habit of looking both at solutions but also at problems at the same time, and trying to think creatively about what's going on. And the second thing is just get at least one other person in your life involved in that. Like, share this podcast with them, share your copy of the book with them. Go out and make sure that somebody else in your life understands what reframing is and why it's important. It becomes much, much easier to solve difficult problems when there's somebody at your side, and especially if that somebody understands what reframing is.
Woohoo! There is the term shaman means someone who sees clearly. So in this case, you are a shaman, Thomas. And a shaman looks at problems. I'll put problems in quotes. And in a sense says, oh, goody, let's see what we can make of this.
Yeah. A problem can sometimes reveal itself to be an opportunity in disguise.
Awesome. Where can people go, Thomas, to find your beautiful, beautiful book and to find out more?
They can get it on Amazon, on Barnes & Nobles, on independent publishers, wherever you normally buy books. It's available both in hard copy and in ebooks. And they can go check out, for that matter, my surname is impossible to Google, I'd say. But if they check out my website called howtoreframe.com, they can get more information there as well.
Fantastic. This has been phenomenal, Thomas. Your book's a game changer, and just thinking about life this way, it opens itself up to so much more richness. We're not stuck in that one tunnel. Any last words of wisdom you want to share with us?
Go forward and do it. Like, literally just start practicing this mindset of looking at problems in a different light and asking, are we solving the right problem here or not? It can make a tremendous difference.
Woohoo! So for everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get what's your problem, and begin reframing your problems today and shine bright. Woohoo!
Thank you.
Thank you so much, my brother. That was awesome.
So impressed by your interview skills. You are you're top of your game.
Thank you. So, thank you. Let me know what I can do to help. Any way, any shape, any form. What's your email address? I'll get you links as soon as we're live.
Does your cat have an email?
You know what's really funny about that is when we do a YouTube Live once a week, we tend to have their picture there. And I've been keep on getting emails from people. Your show has been so influential in helping me and helping change our lives, along with your furry friends. And their biggest request right now is Sir Meowser t-shirts. And we have to come up with a way to do this.
There must be a way. that is a product you cannot like cheat the world of having.
No, there is demand for that. And I try to have a zero inventory policy because I have from our self-published days, we had an indie bestseller years ago. I still have like 6,000 copies in the garage. So I try not to hold on to inventory.
I love that. Well, I'll tell you that if you ever create that t-shirt, I will wear it in one of my next video podcasts. So it's just going to say, "Sir Meow."
All right. We have to do it then, Thomas. We have to do it.
We'll see. Amazing. Thanks so much for the interview. This has been really, really, I think it's the best podcast I've ever seen run. I'm in awe of your preparation levels and like your ability to just make all this flow. Oh, wow. Woohoo.
I just had one of my most fun interviews with Thomas Wedell-Wedellsborg on what's your problem and finding and reframing for solutions. To check out more solution-oriented shows, click here, subscribe below, click on that bell icon to be notified of upcoming shows, YouTube lives with me, and premieres. Be sure to leave your comments and your questions and what's your problem below. Thumbs up if you like us, and sign up for our upcoming boot camp. Simply click here. Love you guys so much. Shine bright. Woohoo!